When I got the letter saying my boat had 24 hours to vacate the dock or face removal, I laughed. Out loud, real belly laugh, not because it was funny, but because I thought naively that it had to be a mistake, like maybe they meant a different dock or a different boat or a different planet where common sense didn't apply. My boat, named Gracie after my late brother's favorite song, had been tied up legally, respectfully, and lovingly at Slip 12 for exactly 3 days. It wasn't even plugged in yet. But sure enough, there it was, in bold print, signed by Deborah Langston, president of the Whispering Pines HOA, non-compliant vessel, subject to fines, towing, and storage fees. I hadn't even unpacked my fishing rods, and this woman was already threatening maritime eviction like she was the queen of lake law. That was my welcome packet, dock eviction notice wrapped in HOA stationery with a faint smell of entitlement and lavender toner. Where are you watching this from? Drop your state in the comments, and while you're at it, tell me what you think about power-drunk HOAs trying to play Monopoly with your neighborhood, because this isn't just a story about a boat slip. This is about what happens when you push the wrong guy with the right paperwork. The news covered the ending, but you're about to hear what they didn't air. Now, let me back up before we all lose the plot. My wife Marcia and I had just retired from 20 years of bouncing between military bases, embassy assignments, and dusty airstrips where the coffee tasted like jet fuel and the bathrooms had signs warning you about scorpions. So when we found a 2-bedroom ranch on the north end of Whispering Pines Lake with access to a community dock and a wide-angle view of the water, we said yes before the real estate agent could finish her sentence. I'd inherited Gracie 6 months earlier, and fixing her up had been my quiet therapy, the kind you don't bill insurance for, but that somehow keeps you sane. She wasn't fancy, not by lake snob standards, but she was clean, solid, and sentimental. A 24-foot fiberglass reminder that even brothers who fight can still leave behind something worth saving. And, according to the closing documents, that dock slip was legally mine. Part of the deal, recorded, stamped, blessed by the county clerk and probably a notary named Carol. So, naturally, when the violation notice arrived, I did what any newly retired, semi-grumpy engineer does. I went straight to the HOA office with a binder full of contracts and a pot of fresh skepticism. The office smelled like copier ink and passive aggression. Deborah Langston greeted me with the kind of smile that makes you check your wallet. She was polished, sharp, and dressed like she was heading to court to sue a school board. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "we've recently adopted aesthetic standards to elevate our community's profile. Your vessel, while quaint, falls short of our updated visual criteria." I blinked. Visual criteria? We're talking about a boat, not a beauty pageant. I pulled out the documents that clearly stated vessels up to 30 feet were permitted. No mention of chrome, no clause for yacht-worthy finishes. Deborah didn't even glance at the paper. "The board has discretion," she said, "to adapt standards that benefit property values." And just like that, my boat became a home value hazard, a floating eyesore in Deborah's curated lakeside magazine. At that point, the warning signs were blinking in neon. Something smelled off, and it wasn't lake algae. On my way back, I stopped at the dock to see if maybe Captain Otis, the elderly gentleman who'd shown me around when we moved in, had any insight. He wasn't there. Just a laminated note on his shed. "Dock oversight has transitioned to Langford Marina Services." Langford Marina? That wasn't in any of the HOA brochures. When I got home, there was another notice taped to our mailbox. This one was bolder. "Second warning, boat subject to removal. Final notice." Final? I hadn't even had a first conversation. That's when Marcia looked at me over her coffee and said, "This isn't about the boat." She was right. This wasn't nautical aesthetics or luxury upgrades. This was something else, something bigger. Someone was trying to dress up a power grab in pearl buttons and HOA language, and unfortunately for them, I read fine print like it's bedtime poetry. By the end of that first week, I had a hunch and a mission. Deborah Langston wasn't just enforcing bylaws, she was weaponizing them, and not just against me. I heard whispers from 2 neighbors about similar notices, Boats being reassigned, access being questioned, a quiet eviction of the non-glossy, the common, the average. If you didn't have a pontoon with teak decking and Bluetooth cup holders, you were on borrowed time. Deborah, it seemed, had a vision, and it didn't include people like me. But here's the thing. Visions don't override contracts. Dreams don't erase documents. And if she thought I'd just tow my legacy down to the county dump, she'd clearly never met a retired engineer with time, curiosity, and a damn good printer. This wasn't going to be a scuffle over a boat slip. It was about to become the kind of polite war where you bring bylaws like ammunition and wear a smile while you dismantle someone's empire, clause by clause. I used to think a dock was just a place to park your boat, but apparently in Whispering Pines, it's also where you find out who's got plans for your wallet, your rights, and your peace of mind. After that second warning sticker showed up, slapped on my mailbox like a scarlet letter for owning a non-glossy vessel, I figured it was time to knock on a few doors, see who else was getting the Deborah Langston treatment. Turns out, I was late to the party. Across the cul-de-sac, Mr. Eldridge's weather-beaten canoe got flagged for aesthetic deviation. The man paddles for arthritis therapy. Deborah called it visual pollution. Another neighbor told me her grandson's inflatable raft had been sighted. A $10 pool float was now apparently a threat to the HOA's precious image. That's when it hit me. Deborah wasn't enforcing rules, she was whitewashing the lake to sell off our peace of mind like it was a designer handbag. And the lake? It wasn't hers to sell. The first person who gave me real clarity was Marisol Vega, an attorney, a neighbor, and, as I quickly learned, a legal hurricane wrapped in gardening gloves. I spotted her crouched over her front yard pulling weeds with the same intensity most people reserve for courtroom objections. When I introduced myself and mentioned the boat situation, she didn't blink. "Violation letter?" she asked. I nodded. She stood, wiped her hands, and said, "Welcome to HOA hell." Over iced tea that was somehow both bitter and affirming, she filled me in. Deborah had been steamrolling anything that didn't fit her reimagined lake lifestyle. Rules were rewritten in vague language, meetings were announced late or not at all. Votes went unrecorded or happened in whispered hallway conversations, and boats like mine, just the first wave of rebranding. She'd even seen her native plant garden get targeted as messy landscaping. And here's the thing, Marisol wasn't mad. She was ready. "They think because most folks won't read the bylaws they can make up the law," she said. "But I do read them, and I write better ones." That's when she handed me the first piece of gold, a printed copy of a 2014 legal amendment requiring all HOA policy changes to be approved by no less than 75% of homeowners when they affected pre-existing access agreements. "They skipped that vote," she said, tapping the clause like it was a pressure point. "They always skipped the votes when they know they'd lose." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were fire. That's when I realized I wasn't fighting this alone. Deborah might have been good at weaponizing silence, but we were about to get very, very loud. Next stop was Otis. Captain Otis, technically, though the HOA had stripped that title like it came with a pension. He'd been the unofficial dock manager since Whispering Pines had fewer than 10 homes and more wild turkeys than SUVs. I found him sitting on a lawn chair behind his weather-stained shed, sipping from a thermos that read, "Slip Happens." When I asked about the new marina oversight, he just shook his head. "They told me I wasn't professional enough," he said. "After 27 years of making sure nobody's pontoon came untied in a storm." What the HOA called a marina upgrade, Otis called a soul swap. He handed me a brittle folder marked Community Dock Docs 199-32010. Inside were inspection forms, handwritten notes, and, most importantly, the original contract with the city showing that the dock was built with public access in mind, not for luxury conversion. "She's trying to sell something she doesn't even own," he muttered. I told him that made two of us who thought so. We fist-bumped like men who just agreed to go to war, with PDFs and patience. And then came Leonard. If Otis was the heart of the lake, Leonard was its memory. Retired school superintendent, oldest resident on the street, walked with a cane and talked like a state senator from 1954. He showed up on my porch unannounced, carrying a banker's box labeled HOA Originals Do Not Toss. Inside, a treasure chest of governance receipts, hand-drawn maps, meeting minutes from 1997, copies of the original bylaws in font so old it might have been chiseled. But the crown jewel was a lease agreement, signed between the HOA and the city, stating in no uncertain terms that the dock must remain accessible to all homeowners, and that no commercial activity could occur without city approval and a full community vote. "They keep acting like they own this lake," Leonard said, adjusting his glasses. "They don't. We do. Or rather, the people do. And the people never voted for this nonsense." He paused. "You're the first one I've seen knock on doors since this all started." I told him I'd knock on every door if it meant keeping Deborah off the water. "Good," he said, "because she's already knee-deep." The final straw came from Deborah herself, though she didn't know it. Marisol had requested the new HOA packet just to see what kind of nonsense they were handing out these days. Between the fluff about neighborhood unity and a glossy flyer for an upcoming wine and cheese mixer, she found a loose page she wasn't supposed to. A printed email chain between Deborah Langston and someone named Charles Langford. That's right, Langford as in Langford Marina Enterprises. Phase 1 begins with removal of all non-conforming vessels, it read. Goal is upscale visibility and improved long-term monetization of waterfront asset. Waterfront asset? This wasn't about preserving property values, this was real estate theater, and Deborah had been cast as the lead villain in a show she forgot to copyright. The email went on to describe anticipated community resistance and advised preemptive violations to establish legal precedent. I reread it 3 times, then looked at Marisol. "They're not just crooked," I said. "They're organized." She smirked and held up the page. "Not anymore. Now they're documented." And just like that, we had it, motive, method, and mistake. Deborah had handed us the rope, and we were about to build the world's prettiest paper trail noose. And that was just the beginning. We had the paperwork, the allies, and now the receipts Deborah didn't know she left behind. But knowing the truth and stopping the train are 2 different things. So when the tow truck rolled up to my driveway 2 days later, engine humming like it had something to prove, I knew it was time to step out of the paperwork and into the fire. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button, because in the next part, things go public, the tow truck backs down, and Deborah learns what happens when you try to outmaneuver a man with a binder full of bylaws and a neighborhood on his side. You do not want to miss how it all goes down. It was a Wednesday morning when the tow truck rolled into the cul-de-sac like it owned the place. Big diesel engine, backup beepers, the whole "we do this every day" routine. I watched from my living room window, coffee in hand, as the guy stepped out in mirrored sunglasses and a clipboard, scanning for targets like my boat had a bounty on it. Gracie was parked neatly in my driveway, on private property, attached to a trailer I'd paid cash for, but apparently that didn't matter to Deborah, or whoever she'd convinced she had towing rights over things she didn't own. I grabbed my binder and headed out like I was walking into small claims court. With one major difference, I planned to win in the street. The guy barely looked up when I approached. "Got an order here to remove an unauthorized vessel," he said, like he was reading from a fortune cookie. "Says it's non-compliant under revised community standards." I asked him to show me the removal order, and sure enough, there it was, signed by Deborah Langston, using a form she probably downloaded and edited in Microsoft Word with her HOA credentials. I flipped open my binder to the HOA's own enforcement process and calmly pointed to the clause that required 48 hours written notice, minimum. His eyes shifted. I kept going. "This boat is on private property, not common ground. No court order, no removal. That's trespassing." He scratched his head. "Look, I'm just doing my job," I nodded. "So am I. Mine involves reading fine print and making sure nobody's bluffing their way into stealing my property. The tension in his shoulders told me we weren't done. But his confidence? That had already left the parking lot. Then came the crowd. First, Marisol, with her legal pad in one hand and a portable file box in the other. Then Captain Otis, who pulled up in his rusted golf cart, arms crossed like he was guarding the Alamo. Then Leonard. Then Janet. Then half a dozen more neighbors who'd received notices or just smelled something off. Deborah arrived last, in a sleek black SUV that looked like it came with stock options and pre-loaded arrogance. She stepped out like she was walking a red carpet, sunglasses perched like a crown. "This boat violates community regulations," she said loud enough for the sidewalk to hear. "It must be removed immediately." I took one step forward and held up the binder like it was a mirror. "You violated the HOA's own procedure. You skipped notification. And you authorized private property removal without jurisdiction." Her lips thinned. "We have the right to enforce standards." Marisol stepped in, her voice like a scalpel. "You do? When you follow your own bylaws." "You didn't. This tow would be illegal. And Calvin here, he's got all the proof." The tow truck driver slowly backed away. "Yeah, I'm gonna need something clearer before we move this thing," he muttered. Deborah glared at him like he was supposed to tow with spite instead of legality. "This isn't over," she snapped, pivoting back toward her SUV. "The board will address this violation formally." That was the first time she'd said the word board all morning, and we didn't miss the shift. Because when people move from I decide to the board decides, it usually means they're hoping someone else will catch the fallout. As she peeled out of the cul-de-sac with all the grace of a reality show exit, the neighbors clapped. Not a thunderous ovation, just a polite ripple, like the sound of people remembering they still had a voice. Otis patted me on the back. "That's round one," he said. "Keep your guard up. She fights dirty." I smiled. "So do I. I just use better footnotes." 2 hours later, notices appeared in every mailbox announcing an emergency HOA meeting. Timing, next day, 6 p.m. No explanation, no agenda, just urgent matters concerning community compliance. The classic move. Bury the real issue in vague language and hope nobody shows up. But this wasn't last month. This wasn't quiet whispers and unchecked power. We had momentum now. That evening, our little alliance met on Marisol's back porch, under string lights over lemon bars and legal strategy. We mapped every resident we knew, divided up the contact list, and got to work. Phones rang, emails were sent, Captain Otis started going door to door. Leonard hit the neighborhood Facebook group with a politely savage post. By sundown, we had 20 RSVPs, by morning, 40. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. It was about how quickly one person could try to rewrite the rules and how powerful a community becomes when it refuses to be erased. And the meeting? Let's just say Deborah didn't expect the turnout. Or the receipts? You know what they say, if you want to get someone's attention, interrupt their view. And that's exactly what we planned to do. After Deborah stormed off from the failed HOA meeting with her lipstick outpacing her logic, we knew we couldn't just let her regroup. We had momentum now. People were paying attention, but attention has the shelf life of a ripe banana. We needed to strike while her lies were still warm and before she found a legal thesaurus to hide behind. That's when it hit me. What if we made it impossible to ignore the truth? Not with angry letters, not with picket signs, but with a little creativity. A lot of PVC pipe and one public lake that didn't belong to her in the first place. If she wanted to gentrify our dock with corporate sparkle, we were going to decorate her backyard with facts. So I called a meeting in my garage, which had somehow become our community's war room. Marisol brought codes and statutes. Otis brought zip ties and a drill that sounded like revolution. Leonard brought a stack of old DNR permits from the 90s and said, "I hope this still counts." We worked all night, fueled by lemonade, spite, and a Costco tray of pinwheel sandwiches. Our plan? Float 74 waterproof protest signs across the lake, each one stating in bold, This dock is for all. This lake is public. Stop the privatization. Not sarcastic, not angry, just the truth. Buoyed up and bobbing right in front of every house, trying to pretend this was all just progress. By 5 a.m., we had a convoy of boats and a box of anchors. We launched at sunrise. Just as the mist lifted off the water, it felt like we were posting sticky notes on the surface of a lie. The signs drifted into place beautifully, small islands of resistance waving in the light breeze. We focused the placement around the community dock, near Deborah's house, and anywhere the Langford Marina had circled on their sketchy design renderings. I'll admit, part of me giggled when I imagined her, sipping coffee in her lakeside sunroom and seeing illegal transfer in progress floating by her gardenias. By 8 a.m., weekend walkers started stopping. Kids asked their parents what the signs meant. One jogger shouted, "It's about time." An hour later, photos were all over the local community app. Someone posted a drone shot with the caption, "When HOA overreach meets homeowner receipts." Another neighbor set up a folding chair on the shore like it was parade day. It was quiet, civil, and absolutely infuriating for the one person who thought she ran this lake like it was her personal Pinterest board. By 11 a.m., the crowd had tripled. Sarah Chen from the local paper showed up with her photographer and a notebook so thick I swear it had a spine. "Mr. Brooks," she said, stepping onto Otis's pontoon, "mind giving me the tour?" We took her out, weaving between signs and explaining the timeline, the lease, and the email that dropped Deborah's mask like a clumsy magician. Sarah nodded, scribbling like she was writing headlines in her head. "So the HOA doesn't own the dock," she clarified. "But they tried to sell off access to a private developer?" "Not tried," I said. "Started, until we turned the lake into a bulletin board." As we docked again, more people were arriving with lawn chairs and water bottles. It was part protest, part summer lake day, and completely unlike anything Whispering Pines had ever seen. That's when we heard it, the screech of brakes. Deborah arrived in a black SUV that looked like it had 3 types of insurance. She slammed the door like it owed her money and made a beeline for the dock. Behind her came Greg Mitchell, her treasurer turned shop, and a tall man in a crisp blazer who looked like he thought the lake was lucky to have him. "This is unauthorized signage," Deborah barked, her voice sharp enough to clean algae. "This is vandalism of community space." The crowd quieted. The officer standing near the entrance didn't move. "Those signs," she said, pointing wildly, "must be removed immediately." Marithel stepped forward, legal folder in hand. "Actually," she said calmly, "they're placed in accordance with state guidelines on non-obstructive markers in public waters. This lake is state-managed, not HOA-controlled, and these signs, they're within every legal parameter." Deborah's face cracked. Not shattered, just fractured, like a window hit by the first pebble before the full break. And Blazer Guy stepped up. "I'm Charles Langford," he announced, like we should applaud. "Langford Marina Enterprises. We were invited to help modernize dock facilities for long-term value." Someone behind me muttered, "Define value." Langford continued, "The current dock is underutilized. Our proposed upgrades aim to elevate community access and aesthetics." Sarah raised a hand. "Is it true you negotiated directly with the HOA president without a community vote?" Langford didn't flinch, but his smile tightened. "We followed the directions provided by our client." Marisol held up a printed copy of the email. "Would this be your direction?" she asked, reading aloud the part about removal of non-conforming vessels and increased value for select properties. Langford's face turned the shade of a ripe tomato that's just realized it's going into salsa. "No further comment," he muttered, stepping back. Deborah looked like she wanted to throw him in the lake. Just then, a new boat approached. A Department of Natural Resources officer stepped off with a clipboard and a presence that said she'd seen enough HOA nonsense for one career. "We've received reports," she said plainly. "These signs are legal. The lake is not HOA property. Please cease and desist any attempts to remove or interfere." Deborah tried to argue, but the officer didn't budge. "Your organization," he said, "is now under review for potential misuse of authority and failure to follow public use guidelines." That was the moment, right there, on the dock. when Deborah stopped being the queen of curated policies and started being just another person who got caught trying to sell something that wasn't hers. The crowd began clapping. Not loud, not rowdy, just deliberate. A rhythm of people realizing they had rights again. Otis leaned over to me and whispered, "She's about to learn you don't need pitchforks when you've got paperwork and paddles." Langford retreated to his SUV. Greg followed, silent as ever. Deborah stayed just long enough to feel the shift in the air, like she could hear the ground cracking under her heels. She didn't yell again. She didn't even make eye contact. She just walked away, heels clicking against the dock like punctuation marks on the end of a failed plan. As the DNR officer addressed the crowd, reassuring them about public protections and upcoming investigations, I looked out over the water, like 74 floating signs, each one doing its job, telling the truth, holding the line, and reminding every waterfront homeowner that some things can't be bought, edited, or staged. That lake belonged to all of us. And today, we'd reclaimed it without raising our voices or breaking a single rule. Just a little strategy, a little signage, and a whole lot of unity. And just like that, the lake spoke louder than any HOA memo ever could. But if you think Deborah's meltdown on the dock was the end of it, oh, you're in for a treat. Because what we uncovered next didn't just embarrass her, it rewrote the whole game. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because in the next part, we bring in the city, unearth the original land deal, and find out the HOA never owned the dock in the first place. And trust me, watching a paper crown fall is even better when it's backed by law. You ever watch someone brag about a house they don't own? That was Deborah the following Monday, strutting across the dock with clipboards and confidence like she was the queen of waterfront destiny. What she didn't know was that we were about to drop the kind of truth you don't recover from. Because Leonard, bless his dusty file cabinet and perfect penmanship, had finally found it. The smoking gun, the trump card, the HOA version of a DNA test on daytime TV. It was an original copy of the land use grant from 29 years ago, showing in black and white that the community dock was built with public money, owned by the city, not the HOA. The HOA was just the caretaker. Deborah had been acting like she was leasing space from God himself, and turns out she didn't even have the deed to her own argument. We didn't waste time. Marisol set up a meeting with the deputy city attorney, Elaine Winters, a woman who looked like she'd once sued a dragon and won. Janet from the city records office came too, carrying a folder thicker than HOA excuses. Elaine flipped through the documents, eyebrows rising with every page. "They didn't just skip permits," she said. "They rewrote reality." According to the grant, the dock had to remain a non-commercial public amenity, accessible to all homeowners and maintained under city oversight. Any changes, structural, legal, financial, required public hearings and city council approval. Deborah hadn't followed any of that. "She's claiming ownership over something she was supposed to babysit," Lane muttered, and she left fingerprints all over the mess. "We didn't just have receipts. We had a legal blueprint. The kind that makes even city attorneys sit up straighter." By Wednesday, the city had quietly opened an investigation. We were told not to confront Deborah yet, let the process work. But life has a sense of timing, and the universe clearly loves drama. That Friday, I was heading down to the dock to check on the signs when I saw a crew unloading metal posts and what looked like gate equipment. A guy in a vest waved a laminated sheet like it was a golden ticket. "Installing automated access controls," he said, "for the private marina conversion." I smiled, pulled out my phone, and hit record. "And you've got permits for this?" I asked. "All cleared through the HOA," he replied. I nodded like a proud parent at a school play. "Just spoke to the city yesterday. They say no permits were approved. You may want to pause before you build a gate on someone else's dock." The man's expression slid from casual to concerned in under 5 seconds. He made a phone call. I made another. 15 minutes later, Deborah showed up, phone in one hand, fury in the other. "You can't keep interfering," she snapped. "These are authorized improvements." I stepped aside as a black sedan pulled up and parked right behind her SUV. Out stepped Elaine Winters, the deputy city attorney, with a police officer in tow. "Ms. Langston," she said calmly, "we need to speak with you regarding unauthorized activity on municipal property." Deborah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I have documents," she said finally. Elaine nodded. "So do we. They just happen to be real." Then Greg Mitchell appeared, probably drawn by the sound of Deborah's career imploding in surround sound. He looked genuinely confused, which honestly tracked. What's going on?" he asked. Elaine turned to him. "As HOA treasurer, can you confirm a $50,000 0 cents payment made to Langford Marina Enterprises from the Community Reserve Fund?" Greg blinked. "There was no vote for that." The police officer raised an eyebrow. Deborah took a step back. The silence was louder than any siren. And then, like clockwork, a second car arrived. Out stepped Charles Langford himself, polished, pressed, and practically humming with smug. "Is there a problem?" he asked, trying to walk past Elaine like she was scenery. "Yes," she said, "several, starting with the fact that your company accepted HOA funds for a project that was never legally approved." Charles smiled like he was trying to charm a vending machine. "We assumed all permissions were in place. Our arrangement was with the HOA president." "And did you get documentation showing the HOA owned the dock?" Elaine asked. "Or city permits? Or notice of public hearings?" His smile didn't falter, but the jaw muscle gave him away again. "Those matters are internal." Elaine gestured to the officer. "Internal's over. We're escalating this to state review. In the meantime, all construction activity ceases, and you, Mr. Langford, may want to contact your counsel. You're named in a preliminary fraud complaint." He didn't respond, just turned, adjusted his blazer, and walked away like the ground wasn't crumbling under him. As for Deborah, she stood there, staring out over the lake like it might offer her a lifeboat, but none came. The officer informed her she'd be receiving a formal notice regarding misuse of authority and misappropriation of funds. "I was doing what's best for the community," she whispered. I stepped in gently. "No. You were doing what's best for your vision. Problem is, the community never voted to join it." She looked at me, eyes glassy, and for a moment I thought she might apologize, but instead she muttered, "This isn't over." Elaine sighed. "Actually, it kind of is." And with that, Deborah Langston, the woman who tried to rewrite access rights with fake votes and glossy emails, was escorted off the dock she never legally controlled. We didn't cheer. Not yet. But I won't lie, the satisfaction hit deep, like a sunset after a storm you saw coming for weeks. It took 3 weeks for Deborah's resignation to hit every mailbox, but when it did, it landed like a champagne cork, loud, messy, and oddly satisfying. The letter was brief, vague, and absolutely allergic to the word sorry, something about stepping aside to avoid distraction and refocus on personal growth. I imagine her personal growth plan started with hiring a lawyer. Greg Mitchell was tapped as interim president, though his name was still mud in most households. A few folks wanted the whole board replaced, others wanted blood, but what the community needed most was clarity. Not revenge, just light. So when Frank Thompson stood up at the emergency meeting and said, "Let's build this back better than they left it," people didn't clap, they stood. Because after months of pettiness and posturing, we'd finally found something worth agreeing on. The HOA didn't need more power, it needed more people who remembered what home actually meant. They formed a reform committee on the spot. Half old-timers, half new blood, all volunteers with zero interest in free brunches or gate codes. I got nominated, of course, and declined just as fast. "I'll be around," I told them, "but I like being the guy outside the meeting who reads the fine print and asks the uncomfortable questions." They laughed, but it stuck. Instead, I spent the next month building a website with Marisol and Janet. We called it Neighbors First, a homeowners' rights resource hub with plain English guides, archived laws, and a forum for swapping stories and strategies. Think of it as the opposite of an HOA newsletter. No fluff, no spin, just facts, flashlight style. The day we launched, I got 30 emails from nearby communities asking how we pulled it off. Turns out Whispering Pines wasn't the only place where a lake view came with fine print traps and power-tripping neighbors in pastel blazers. Meanwhile, the dock transformed, not with steel and sales brochures, but with care. The city formally reinstated it as a public access site, complete with an updated agreement clarifying what the HOA could manage and what it absolutely couldn't. Captain Otis got his title back, along with a modest stipend and a contract that made it official. The first thing he did? Cleaned up every slip with a toothbrush and elbow grease. "This dock's got memory," he said. "We treat it right, it'll float us through anything." And to mark the shift, the new board approved one small change. A handcrafted wooden sign at the entrance, carved by Leonard himself. It read, "Silver Pines Dock, owned by all for all." Below it, etched in smaller print, was a quote I'd said during the first float protest. "The strength of a community lies in what we preserve together, not what we possess alone." I didn't cry when they put it up, but I stared at it long enough for Marcia to hand me tissues anyway. Then came the festival. The idea started as a neighborhood potluck and grew into a full-blown celebration of community reclamation. We called it the first annual Dock Day. There were food trucks, fishing contests, live music from a local dad band called the Slip-Ups, and even a dunk tank that, in poetic justice, featured a cardboard cutout of Deborah taped to the backboard. Families picnicked under tents. Kids ran around with lake water in their shoes. And boats, real boats, all kinds, lined the dock like they'd never left. Some shiny, some humble, all welcome. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it felt earned. Like we'd taken something brittle and made it bend, not break. And that night, as the sun dipped below the tree line, someone handed me a paper plate with barbecue and said, "You're Calvin, right? Thanks for saving this place for folks like us." I smiled because, honestly, I hadn't saved anything alone. I just shook the first branch hard enough for the whole tree to notice the rot. Deborah's house went on the market quietly and sold for 15% below appraised value. Small loss in real estate terms, giant metaphor and moral ones. Rumor was she moved to a neighborhood with no HOA at all. The irony nearly cost a neighborhood blackout. As for Langford Marina Enterprises, they faced civil action in multiple counties. Turns out, we were just one stop on their lakeside monopoly tour. Sarah Chen's article went viral and led to a full investigative series on HOA corruption statewide. One headline read, "The Dock That Rocked the State House." I kept a printout taped to my shed wall, not out of pride, okay, maybe a little, but because it reminded me that small fights can ripple far when you stop assuming you're powerless. That lake had always belonged to the people. It just needed someone to say it out loud, and keep saying it until the echo became active. So now, when I take Gracie out for a quiet morning ride, I pass by the new sign, nod at Otis, and wave to neighbors who once thought HOA meetings were just potlucks with rules. Things are different now. Meetings are packed, agendas are transparent, power is shared. It's not perfect, but it's better, because it's ours. And every so often, a new resident will stop me at the dock, say they heard the story, and ask if it's true. I always smile and say, which part? Because there's a version where a boat slip almost got stolen by a petty president with a dream too big for her ethics. But there's also a version where a neighborhood remembered who it was and decided that shared space meant shared responsibility. And me? I'm just a guy with a stubborn streak, a decent printer, and a boat named after his brother who'd be damn proud we didn't back down. And that's how it ended, not with a courtroom drama or a shouting match in a parking lot, but with a quiet lake, a clean dock, and neighbors who finally saw each other clearly again. Looking back, I didn't set out to start a movement. I just wanted to park my boat in the slip I paid for. But that small act of standing up, of saying no when it would have been easier to back down, became something much bigger than me. We didn't just protect a piece of wood jutting into the water. We protected the soul of a neighborhood, the right to belong, the right to speak up, the right to not be edited out of the place you call home. If this story gave you a little fire in your chest, that's no accident. It's a reminder that power, when unchecked, grows bold, and silence is its favorite ally. But one person with the truth and a folder full of receipts can shake a system that's forgotten who it's supposed to serve. Whether it's a doc, a deed, or just the dignity of not being told you don't belong, fight for it. And when you do, you'll be amazed how fast the quiet ones start clapping. So if you believe communities work best when they're built on fairness, not favoritism, if you believe standing up is worth it even when it's inconvenient, if you've ever tangled with an HOA, a board, or a system that forgot it worked for you, go ahead and like this video, leave a comment below, tell me what state you're watching from, and if you've ever had a Deborah in your life. And most of all, hit that subscribe button because we've got more true stories coming. Real people, real power, and the kind of neighborly justice that doesn't always make the headlines but should. Thanks for listening, and next time someone tries to gate the lake, just remember, we've got keys too.